You're about to lose a game you didn't even know you were playing. Right now, at this very moment, someone is thinking 3 moves ahead of you. They're not smarter. They're not luckier. They're not working harder. But they're winning. And you're about to find out why. Most people navigate life like they're driving in fog. They can see a few feet ahead, maybe make out the immediate obstacles, react to what's directly in front of them. Strategic thinkers, they have a map of the entire terrain. They know where the fog is thickest, where the roads converge, where most drivers will make predictable mistakes. They're not reacting to the fog. They're using it. Here's what nobody tells you about strategic thinking. It's not a special gift granted to CEOs and chess grandmasters. It's a learnable skill that most people never develop because they confuse activity with progress, tactics with strategy, and being busy with being effective. The difference between someone who shapes their life and someone whose life shapes them isn't intelligence or resources. It's the ability to think strategically about what those resources should be used for in the first place. This isn't about business strategy, though we'll explore that. This isn't about military tactics, though the principles apply. This is about something far more fundamental. How to train your mind to see what others miss, anticipate what others can't predict, and position yourself where the opportunities are before they become obvious to everyone else. What strategic thinking actually is. Let's start with what strategic thinking is not, because most people have this completely backwards. Strategic thinking is not planning. Planning is deciding what you'll do tomorrow, next week, next quarter. Planning is comfortable because it deals with resources you control. I'll hire 5 people. I'll launch this product. I'll open that location. These are all decisions about things within your power to execute. Strategy is different. Strategy is a theory about winning. It's an integrated set of choices about where to compete and how to win on that playing field. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Strategy forces you to bet on outcomes you cannot control. You can control hiring 5 people. You cannot control whether customers will prefer your offering over your competitors. That's why most people prefer planning to strategy. Planning feels safe. Strategy requires accepting that you might be wrong. Think about the difference this way. If you're planning your day, you might say, I'll wake up at 6 a.m., exercise for an hour, work on Project A until noon, have lunch, work on Project B until 5 p.m. That's a plan. It's a list of activities. But a strategy would ask different questions. Which projects will position me for the opportunities one want 3 years from now? What capabilities am I building that my competitors aren't? Where am I choosing not to compete so I can dominate the areas where I do compete? See the difference? Planning is about activities. Strategy is about positioning. Strategic thinking is meta-thinking. It's thinking about thinking. When you see a headline, most people immediately fit it into their existing worldview. Oh, this confirms what I already believed, or this contradicts what I know, so it must be wrong. That's not strategic thinking. That's pattern matching to your existing mental models. Strategic thinking asks, how do I create my worldview in the first place? What would change it? What assumptions am I making? Why do I prioritize certain information over other information? Does that prioritization still make sense? The world changes rapidly, but most people's worldviews update at a glacial pace. Strategic thinkers constantly audit their own thinking. This is uncomfortable work. Your brain doesn't like it when you engage with perspectives that challenge your existing beliefs. It finds it unnerving, even threatening. But here's what great strategic thinkers understand. Opposing viewpoints aren't actually opposing. They're just different. If you were born in a different country, in a different era, in different circumstances, you'd have a different worldview. Not an opposing one, just different. The person who disagrees with you isn't villainous. They're the hero of their own story, which happens to be a different story than yours. People who are comfortable only with perspectives that confirm their priors might be excellent tactical thinkers. They might execute brilliantly within a known framework, but they cannot be strategic thinkers because strategy requires updating your framework based on new information, different perspectives, and changing conditions. Before we go deeper, if you're finding value in this exploration of strategic thinking, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community of people who refuse to settle for tactical thinking when strategic thinking is available. Hit that subscribe button and join us. The architecture of strategic thought. Strategic thinking has a structure. It's not random. It's not mystical. It's a specific way of organizing information and making decisions that can be learned, practiced, and mastered. At its foundation, strategic thinking is about three core questions. First, where am I choosing to play? This isn't about where you are now. It's about which playing field you're deliberately selecting. Most people never choose their playing field. They simply show up where they find themselves and try to compete there. Strategic thinkers understand that the choice of playing field is often more important than how well you play on it. Southwest Airlines didn't try to beat American, United, and Delta at the hub-and-spoke game with business class seats and meal service. They chose a different playing field entirely. They said, we're going to be the substitute for Greyhound buses. We're going to compete on a completely different dimension. That choice of playing field made all their subsequent choices coherent. Second, how will I win on that playing field? This is your theory of competitive advantage. What will you do differently or better than anyone else serving that same space? This isn't about being good at everything. It's about being distinctly better at the specific things that matter for the playing field you chose. Southwest's answer was brutally clear. Point-to-point flights, only 737s, no meals, no travel agent bookings, faster turnarounds, lower costs, lower prices. Every single one of those choices reinforced the others. That's what coherent strategy looks like. Third, what capabilities must be true for this to work? This is where most strategies fall apart. People articulate a nice theory about where they'll play and how they'll win, but they never honestly assess what would have to be true about themselves, their resources, their competition, and their market for that theory to actually work. This is the discipline that separates real strategy from wishful thinking. You lay out your logic explicitly. For our strategy to succeed, we would need to believe that customers care more about price than amenities and short-haul flights. We can achieve faster turnarounds than competitors. Our point-to-point model won't be immediately copied. Our cost advantage is sustainable. Then you watch the world unfold. If one of those assumptions proves incorrect, you have a clear signal to adjust your strategy before you've committed resources that can't be recovered. But here's where strategic thinking gets really interesting. The architecture of strategic thought isn't just about business. It applies to everything. Your career is a playing field. Where are you choosing to compete? Most people compete in crowded spaces, doing what everyone else does. Strategic thinkers look for playing fields where their specific combination of skills creates unusual advantage. They don't try to be good at everything. They ask, where can I be distinctly valuable in a way that few others can replicate? Your personal development is a playing field. How are you choosing to build capabilities that compound? Most people collect random skills, hoping something will prove useful. Strategic thinkers identify meta skills, capabilities that improve their ability to develop all other capabilities. Learning how to learn. Building systems for capturing and connecting ideas. Developing frameworks for making better decisions. These aren't just skills. They're multipliers for every other skill you might develop. Your relationships are a playing field. Who are you choosing to build deep connections with, and why? Most people accumulate contacts randomly based on proximity and circumstance. Strategic thinkers curate networks deliberately, not in a manipulative way, but in a thoughtful way. They ask, who challenges my thinking? Who has capabilities that complement mine? Who operates in spaces I want to understand better? Who shares values but brings different perspectives? The architecture is always the same. Choose your playing field deliberately. Develop a theory of how you'll win there. Identify what must be true for that theory to work. Test those assumptions against reality. Adjust as you learn. This is very different from how most people operate. Most people are in reactive mode. Something happens, they respond. Another thing happens, they respond to that. It's exhausting and ineffective. Strategic thinkers operate in design mode. They're creating the conditions for certain outcomes to become likely. They're not controlling outcomes, which is impossible. They're stacking probabilities in their favor. Why most people never develop strategic thinking? Here's an uncomfortable truth. Most people actively avoid strategic thinking, even when they claim to want it. They avoid it because strategic thinking requires admitting uncertainty. When you think strategically, you're making bets on theories that can't be proven in advance. You're saying, I believe this approach will work, but I can't guarantee it. That feels risky. Planning feels safer because it's just executing activities you control. But here's what people don't realize. The appearance of safety in planning is an illusion. While you're busily planning your activities, your competition is developing a strategy for winning. And when strategy meets planning, strategy wins. Every time. American air carriers planned routes and schedules and gate acquisitions. Southwest had a strategy for dominating a specific segment. The planners shared a shrinking pie. The strategic player took whatever share they wanted. People also avoid strategic thinking because it requires confronting trade-offs. Strategy is as much about choosing what not to do as what to do. Southwest chose not to offer meals, not to fly hub and spoke, not to book through travel agents, not to have multiple aircraft types. Each of those nots felt like a sacrifice to traditional carriers. But those nots were exactly what enabled Southwest's strategy to work. Most people hate saying no. They want to keep all options open. They want to be good at everything. Strategic thinking requires the discipline to say, I'm going to be excellent at this specific thing, which means I'm deliberately choosing not to pursue these other things. That's scary. What if you choose wrong? But here's the paradox. Trying to keep all options open means you never become distinctly good at any particular thing. You become mediocre at everything. In a competitive environment, mediocre at everything loses to excellent at something specific every single time. There's another reason people avoid strategic thinking. It exposes you. When you plan, you're just listing activities. When you strategize, you're articulating a theory about how the world works and what you believe will happen. That theory can be proven wrong. Your activities can't be wrong. They just are. But your theory about how customers will respond, how competitors will react, how market conditions will evolve, that theory is falsifiable. And people don't like being wrong. Great strategic thinkers are comfortable with being wrong. They're curious and open. They admit when their theory isn't working and talk about what that means. They revise their thinking based on evidence. This doesn't mean they're wishy-washy or lack conviction. It means they hold their beliefs strongly, but loosely. Strong enough to act on them. Loose enough to update them when reality provides contradictory evidence. Think about Nelson Mandela. He had a theory about South Africa's future. He believed that for his country to have any future at all, he needed to put aside personal vendettas and the desire for immediate justice. He needed to take the longest possible view on values, ethics, and human development. That required extraordinary strategic thinking. He could have pursued short-term retribution. That would have felt justified. but his strategy required him to see 20, 30, 40 years ahead and ask, what needs to be true for this country to heal and prosper? And then make choices, however painful, that aligned with that long-term theory. Most people think in terms of weeks or months. Strategic thinkers think in terms of decades. That doesn't mean they ignore the present. It means their present actions are informed by a theory about where those actions lead over extended time frames. If you're starting to see why strategic thinking is so powerful, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We're going deep on frameworks and approaches that most people never encounter. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Pattern recognition, the strategic thinker's superpower. Strategic thinking is fundamentally about pattern recognition. It's about seeing connections that others miss, identifying trends before they become obvious, and understanding how different forces interact and create trade-offs. Most people look at events individually. This happened, then that happened, then this other thing happened. They're collecting data points. Strategic thinkers look at the same events and see patterns. They see how these events relate to each other, what they reveal about underlying dynamics, and what they suggest about future developments. This is not about predicting the future. You can't predict the future. The future is fundamentally uncertain and shaped by too many variables. But you can recognize patterns that make certain futures more or less likely. You can identify which indicators to watch that will give you early signals about which direction things are moving. Think about how different this is from reacting to headlines. When a news story breaks, most people immediately try to place it in their existing understanding. This is good for my position, or this contradicts what I believe. Strategic thinkers ask different questions. What pattern does this fit into? What assumptions does this challenge? What would I need to believe for this to be significant rather than noise? What are the second-order effects I should be considering? This is what makes strategic thinking so different from tactical thinking. Tactical thinking is, here's the problem in front of me. How do I solve it? Strategic thinking is, why does this type of problem keep appearing? What's the pattern? What would I need to change upstream to prevent this entire category of problems? Let's make this concrete. Imagine you're running a company and you keep losing talented people to competitors. The tactical response is match the competitor's salary, improve benefits, have better exit interviews. You are solving each departure individually. The strategic response is, why do talented people leave? Is there a pattern in who leaves and when? What does that reveal about our culture, our growth opportunities, our management practices? Are we even competing on the dimension that matters most to the people we most want to keep? Maybe compensation isn't the real issue. Maybe we're selecting for the wrong playing field. Maybe highly talented people leave because we don't give them challenging problems to solve, and no amount of salary will fix that underlying pattern. See the difference? The tactical thinker addresses symptoms. The strategic thinker identifies the pattern that generates those symptoms. Pattern recognition operates at multiple levels simultaneously, and this is what makes it so powerful. At the macro level, you're looking at large-scale trends. How is technology changing? How are demographics shifting? How are geopolitical dynamics evolving? What are the big forces that will reshape the landscape over the next decade? Strategic thinkers maintain a mental model of these macro patterns and constantly update it. At the institutional level, you're looking at how organizations and systems behave. Companies, governments, markets each have predictable patterns. Understanding those patterns helps you anticipate how they'll respond to different conditions. When you know how systems typically behave, you can position yourself to benefit from that behavior rather than be surprised by it. At the individual level, you're recognizing patterns in human psychology and decision-making. People are predictable in certain ways. They overvalue the present relative to the future. They prefer avoiding losses to acquiring gains. They make decisions based on narratives, not just data. When you understand these patterns, you can design strategies that work with human nature rather than against it. The real magic happens when you see how patterns at different levels interact. A macro trend in technology creates opportunities at the institutional level for companies that can adapt quickly, which creates needs at the individual level for specific skills and capabilities. Strategic thinkers see these connections and position themselves at the intersections where multiple patterns create leverage. But here's what most people get wrong about pattern recognition. They think it's about being right. It's not. It's about being less wrong over time. Your initial pattern recognition will be imperfect. You'll see patterns that aren't there. You'll miss patterns that are there. That's inevitable. The key is to treat your pattern recognition as a hypothesis that you're constantly testing. You're not trying to predict the future perfectly. You're trying to develop a theory about how things work that gets refined and improved as you gather more data. This is why strategic thinkers explicitly lay out their logic. They say, here's the pattern I think I'm seeing. Here's what would have to be true for that pattern to be meaningful. Here's what I'm watching for that would confirm or disconfirm this pattern. Then they watch and adjust. This approach turns pattern recognition from a mystical gift into a systematic practice. You're not waiting for sudden insights. You're deliberately developing frameworks for organizing information, hypotheses about how pieces fit together, and triggers for when to update your thinking. Consider how this applies to your own life. What patterns exist in your own behavior and results? When do you tend to make your best decisions? When do you make your worst? What circumstances tend to lead to your most productive work? What situations consistently drain your energy? Most people never examine these patterns systematically. Strategic thinkers do, because recognizing your own patterns allows you to design your environment and choices to work with those patterns rather than against them. The theory of competitive positioning. Everything is competitive, whether you want to admit it or not. You're competing for jobs, for attention, for resources, for opportunities. Even if you're not competing against specific individuals, you're competing against alternatives. If someone hires you, they're not hiring someone else. If someone reads your work, they're not reading something else in that moment. If an investor funds your venture, they're not funding a different one. Strategic thinking requires acknowledging this reality and then asking, given that competition exists, how do I position myself to win? The answer is never be better at everything. That's not a strategy. That's a fantasy. Nobody wins by being marginally better than everyone else at everything they do. You win by being distinctly better at something specific that matters to a particular group of people on a playing field you've deliberately chosen. This is what positioning means. It's not about your capabilities in absolute terms. It's about your capabilities relative to alternatives in a specific context. Southwest Airlines wasn't the best airline by traditional metrics. They didn't have the most comfortable seats or the best meals or the most extensive route network. But for people who wanted cheap, reliable point-to-point travel for short distances, Southwest was perfectly positioned. They were exactly what that segment needed, in a way that traditional carriers couldn't match without abandoning their entire business model. That's the power of good positioning. You're not trying to be all things to all people. You're trying to be the obviously right choice for specific people in specific circumstances. This principle applies everywhere. In your career, you're not trying to be competent at everything. You're trying to develop a combination of capabilities that makes you distinctly valuable for specific types of problems or opportunities. The power comes from the combination being unusual, not from any individual capability being exceptional. Think about it this way. Lots of people are good at analysis. Lots of people are good at communication. Lots of people are good at coding. But how many people are good at all three and can translate complex technical concepts into compelling stories backed by rigorous analysis? That combination is rare. If you position yourself at that intersection, you're not competing against everyone who has any one of those skills. You're competing in a much smaller pool of people who have that specific combination. This is why strategic thinkers think carefully about which capabilities to develop and how those capabilities fit together. They're not collecting random skills. They're deliberately building combinations that create positional advantage. But positioning requires something that makes most people uncomfortable. It requires saying no. You have to choose which playing field to compete on, which means choosing not to compete on other playing fields. You have to decide what you'll be known for, which means accepting you won't be known for other things. You have to pick your battles, which means walking away from some battles entirely. This feels wrong to most people. They want optionality. They want flexibility. They don't want to close off possibilities. But here's the strategic reality. Trying to keep all options open means you never commit enough to any option to become distinctly good at it. You remain mediocre at many things instead of excellent at something specific. And in competitive environments, mediocre at many things loses to excellent at something specific. There's a related concept that strategic thinkers understand: asymmetric competition. Don't compete on the same terms as your competition. Change the terms of competition to favor your strengths. If you can't outspend competitors, compete on agility. If you can't outscale them, compete on customization. If you can't match their brand recognition, compete on innovation. The key is to identify a dimension of competition where you can be distinctly strong and your competition is structurally weak. This is what Southwest did. Traditional carriers competed on network scope, amenities, and business class service. Southwest changed the game entirely and competed on price, frequency, and reliability for short-haul travel. The major carriers couldn't respond effectively without cannibalizing their existing business model. That's asymmetric competition. In your own strategic thinking, always ask, am I competing on terms that favor my strengths and expose competitors' weaknesses? Or am I competing on their terms, where they have natural advantages? Most people accept the existing terms of competition without questioning them. Strategic thinkers question everything about how competition is defined and look for ways to change the game in their favor. We're going deep on strategic thinking frameworks that can transform how you approach every decision. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now. You're going to want to see what comes next. Time horizons, the strategic dimension most people ignore. Here's a question that reveals whether someone thinks strategically. What's your time horizon? Most people operate on time horizons measured in days, weeks, or months. What needs to get done this week? What are this month's goals? Maybe, if they're unusually forward-thinking, they have annual plans. Strategic thinkers operate on time horizons measured in years and decades. They make decisions today based on where they want to be in 5, 10, 20 years. This doesn't mean ignoring the present. It means the present is informed by a theory about the future. The fascinating thing about time horizons is that they completely change which decisions make sense. Something that looks obviously right on a 3-month time horizon might be obviously wrong on a 3-year time horizon, and vice versa. If you're thinking about the next quarter, you maximize for immediate revenue. If you're thinking about the next decade, you might deliberately sacrifice revenue today to build capabilities that will dominate tomorrow. Neither approach is inherently right or wrong, but they lead to completely different choices, and most people never consciously choose their time horizon. They just default to short-term thinking because it's what's visible and urgent. Strategic thinkers explicitly choose their time horizon for different types of decisions. For tactical execution, a short time horizon makes sense. But for positioning, for capability building, for relationship development, they think in years and decades. Consider how Jeff Bezos thought about Amazon. In the early years, Amazon was hemorrhaging money. Wall Street kept asking, "When will you be profitable?" And Bezos kept saying, "We're optimizing for long-term market leadership, not short-term profitability." He was willing to lose money for years to build infrastructure, customer loyalty, and market position that would be nearly impossible to challenge later. That's a long time horizon. Most CEOs can't operate on that time horizon because they're accountable to quarterly earnings. Most individuals can't operate on that time horizon because they're thinking about next month's bills. But the ones who can extend their time horizons create asymmetric advantages. When your time horizon is longer than your competition's, you can make investments they can't justify. You can weather downturns they can't survive. You can pursue strategies they can't match. This applies personally as well as professionally. If you're thinking about your career on a 5-year time horizon, you might stay in a comfortable job that pays well. If you're thinking on a 20-year time horizon, you might take a lower-paying position that builds capabilities that will be far more valuable 2 decades from now. If you're thinking about your health on a 1-year time horizon, you focus on losing weight for an event. If you're thinking on a 30-year time horizon, you focus on building habits and systems that will keep you healthy and capable as you age. If you're thinking about your relationships on a monthly time horizon, you optimize for pleasant interactions. If you're thinking on a lifetime time horizon, you invest in relationships that will grow and deepen over decades, even if that requires difficult conversations in the present. The time horizon you choose determines which actions make sense, and most people never consciously choose. They simply default to whatever time horizon feels most urgent, which is almost always shorter than the optimal strategic time horizon. Here's the practice. For any significant decision, explicitly ask yourself, what's the appropriate time horizon for this decision? Then force yourself to think through the implications on that time horizon before deciding. What looks like the right move this month, this year, this decade? If those answers differ, why? And which time horizon should take precedence for this particular decision? This simple practice of explicitly naming your time horizon transforms decision-making. It prevents you from optimizing for the wrong time scale. It helps you see trade-offs you'd otherwise miss. It allows you to make choices today that your future self will thank you for, even if your present self finds them uncomfortable. The strategic value of optionality. We've talked about the importance of choosing, of committing, of saying no. But there's a paradox in strategic thinking. Sometimes the right strategy is to maximize optionality, to keep possibilities open rather than committing to a specific path. The key is understanding when to commit and when to preserve options. This is one of the most subtle and difficult aspects of strategic thinking, and most people get it wrong in both directions. They either commit too early to paths that turn out to be dead ends, or they preserve optionality for so long that they never develop depth in anything. Here's the principle. In the early stages of exploring a domain, maximize optionality. Try many things. Keep possibilities open. Learn broadly. But once you identify a direction that shows real promise, once you see a playing field where you can win, commitment becomes valuable. That's when you narrow your focus, say no to other attractive options, and go deep. The mistake most people make is staying in exploration mode indefinitely. They keep trying new things, keep their options open, never commit deeply enough to anything to become distinctly good at it. This feels safe because they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. But the result is scattered effort and mediocre results across many domains rather than exceptional results in any domain. The opposite mistake is committing too quickly. Some people find something that works okay and immediately go all in, without adequately exploring whether there might be better alternatives. They optimize locally instead of globally. Strategic thinkers move deliberately through phases. Early on, they're in exploration mode. They're experimenting, gathering information, testing different approaches, seeing what resonates. They're deliberately keeping options open because they're still learning what the landscape looks like. But they're not exploring randomly. They have hypotheses about what might work and why. They're conducting experiments, not just trying things haphazardly. Each experiment is designed to test a specific assumption or reveal specific information. Then, as certain paths show promise, they enter a phase of focused exploration. They're still preserving some optionality, but they're narrowing their focus. They're going deeper in areas that seem most promising while still keeping a few alternative paths alive. Finally, when they've identified a clear direction, they commit. They narrow their focus dramatically. They say no to attractive alternatives because they've made a strategic choice about where they can win. This commitment allows them to develop depth, build momentum, and create compounding returns. But here's the sophisticated part. Even after committing, strategic thinkers maintain some level of optionality. They commit 80% to their primary strategy, while keeping 20% available for exploration and opportunistic pivots. This prevents them from being blindsided if their primary strategy stops working. They're committed enough to go deep, but not so rigid that they can't adapt. This balance between commitment and optionality is dynamic. It shifts based on what you're learning, how conditions are changing, and where you are in your strategic development. Early career, maximize optionality. Mid-career, commit deeply to building distinctive capabilities. Late career, you might expand optionality again as you leverage your built capabilities across different domains. The key is being explicit about which mode you're in and why. Are you exploring right now? And if so, where you try to learn? Are you committing? And if so, what are you committing to and why? How will you know if you need to shift from exploration to commitment, or from commitment back to exploration? Most people never ask these questions. They just find themselves in various situations without having strategically chosen how much optionality to preserve versus how deeply to commit. Strategic thinkers make this choice consciously and adjust it deliberately as the circumstances change. Strategic thinking and uncertainty. Here's something that sounds paradoxical. Strategic thinking is most valuable exactly when the future is most uncertain. But that's also when it's hardest to do. When the future is predictable, you don't need strategy. You just need good execution. You can see what's coming, plan for it, and optimize your activities to prepare. But when the future is genuinely uncertain, when you can't predict what will happen, that's when thinking strategically becomes essential. The reason is that strategic thinking isn't about predicting the future. It's about positioning yourself to benefit from multiple possible futures. It's about creating a position where many different paths forward lead to good outcomes for you. This is completely different from planning. A plan says, I predict the future will unfold this way, so I'll prepare for that specific future. Strategy says, I don't know which of several possible futures will unfold, but I can position myself so that I win in most of them. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you're trying to build a career in a rapidly changing industry. The planning approach would be, I think this specific technology will dominate, so I'll specialize in that technology. If you're right, you win big. If you're wrong, you've specialized in something obsolete. The strategic approach would be, I'll develop capabilities that are valuable across multiple technological paths. I'll build a network that connects me to people exploring different approaches. I'll position myself where I can observe trends early and pivot quickly. I won't commit entirely to one path. but I'll be positioned to benefit regardless of which path succeeds. This is what optionality means in the context of uncertainty. You're not trying to predict. You're trying to position. Strategic thinkers do something else that's crucial in uncertainty. They explicitly identify their key assumptions and watch for signals that indicate whether those assumptions are holding or breaking. Remember our earlier discussion about laying out what would have to be true for your strategy to work? That becomes your monitoring system. You're not trying to predict every possible scenario. You're identifying the critical factors that your strategy depends on, and you're watching those factors closely. When you get signals that one of your critical assumptions is failing, that's your trigger to adjust before you've committed too many resources to a failing strategy. This is very different from what most people do. Most people commit to a path, stop questioning their assumptions, and then experience surprise when reality doesn't match their expectations. Strategic thinkers maintain what's sometimes called strong opinions, weakly held. They commit enough to make progress, but they hold their assumptions lightly enough to update them when evidence suggests they should. There's another key practice for strategic thinking in uncertainty: scenario planning. You're not trying to predict which scenario will happen. You're identifying several plausible scenarios and asking, what would I need to do to thrive in each scenario? What actions are valuable across multiple scenarios? What signals would tell me early which scenario is unfolding? This prevents you from being blindsided. Even if you can't predict which future will happen, you've at least thought through the implications of different possibilities. You're not starting from zero when reality reveals itself. But perhaps most importantly, strategic thinking in uncertainty requires accepting that you can't eliminate uncertainty. You're not trying to create perfect knowledge. You're trying to create robust positions that work well even with imperfect knowledge. This is emotionally difficult for many people. We want certainty. We want to know we're making the right choice. Strategic thinking requires accepting that you can never know for certain and choosing anyway. Not recklessly, but based on the best theory you can develop with available information, with commitment to adjust that theory as you learn more. The alternative is paralysis. If you demand certainty before acting, you'll never act, because certainty in complex domains is impossible. Strategic thinkers move forward with well-reasoned uncertainty rather than waiting for impossible certainty. The practice of strategic thinking. Strategic thinking isn't something you do occasionally when making big decisions. It's a practice you develop through deliberate, repeated application. Like going to the gym, it's uncomfortable at first, but becomes natural with consistent practice. The first step is building the habit of stepping back. Most of us are caught in the flow of daily activity. Things happen, we respond. More things happen, we respond to those. It's reactive and exhausting. Strategic thinking requires regularly pausing that reactive cycle to ask, what pattern am I in right now? Is this pattern serving my larger goals? What would I see if I stepped back and looked at the bigger picture? This sounds simple, but it's remarkably difficult. Your brain resists it. You're busy. There are urgent things demanding attention. Taking time to think strategically feels like a luxury you can't afford. But here's the paradox. The busier you are, the more valuable strategic thinking becomes, because busy without strategic equals running hard in the wrong direction. Build this habit by scheduling it. Put recurring blocks in your calendar labeled strategic thinking time. Protect these blocks as fiercely as you'd protect an important meeting. Use this time to step back from tactical execution and ask strategic questions. What am I trying to achieve, really? Not just today or this week, but fundamentally? Is what I'm doing aligned with that? Am I making progress on what matters most? Or just staying busy with what's urgent? What's my theory about how my current activities will lead to my desired outcomes? What assumptions is that theory based on? Are those assumptions still valid? These aren't comfortable questions. They force you to confront whether you're actually moving toward your goals or just creating the illusion of progress through activity. But that discomfort is the signal that you're doing important work. The second practice is deliberately engaging with different perspectives. Remember, strategic thinking requires curiosity about viewpoints dramatically different from your own. This doesn't mean agreeing with everyone. It means being genuinely curious about why intelligent people see things differently than you do. Make this concrete. Regularly read, listen to, or engage with people whose worldview differs from yours. Not to argue with them, but to understand their mental models. What do they see that you don't? What priorities do they have that shape their thinking? If you were in their position, with their constraints and information, would their perspective make sense? This is harder than it sounds, because your brain wants to immediately categorize different perspectives as wrong. But the practice is to resist that impulse, and instead try to inhabit those perspectives, to see the world temporarily through those frameworks. You're not changing your mind necessarily. You're expanding your mental model of how different people see the same situation. The third practice is explicitly articulating your strategic logic. Don't just have vague intuitions about what you should do. Force yourself to write down, here's my goal. Here's the playing field I'm choosing to compete on. Here's how I plan to win on that playing field. Here's what would have to be true for that plan to work. Here's what I'm watching for to know if my assumptions are breaking. Writing this down seems tedious, but it's transformative. When your strategy exists only in your head, it can be vague and internally inconsistent without you noticing. When you write it down, the gaps and contradictions become visible. That discomfort is valuable. Better to discover problems in your strategic logic before you've committed significant resources. The fourth practice is regular review and adjustment. Your strategic logic isn't set in stone. It's a working hypothesis that you're constantly testing against reality. Schedule regular strategy reviews. Quarterly is often about right, where you explicitly ask, what did I predict or assume? What actually happened? What does that teach me? Do I need to adjust my strategy or adjust my execution? This practice prevents you from becoming rigid. You're committed to your strategy, but you're updating it based on evidence. When something you predicted doesn't happen, that's not failure. That's information. Use it to refine your thinking. The fifth practice is building and maintaining what I call your strategic council. These are people who help you think strategically. Not just people who confirm your views, but people who challenge your assumptions, bring different perspectives, and ask hard questions. Your strategic council doesn't need to be formal. It's just a handful of people, 3 to 5 is often enough, who you trust to give you honest, thoughtful feedback on your strategic thinking. They don't need to be experts in your domain. In fact, diversity of perspective is often more valuable than domain expertise. You want people who think differently than you do. Meet with these people regularly, perhaps monthly or quarterly. Share your strategic thinking. Ask them to poke holes in it. Where are my blind spots? What am I not seeing? What assumptions should I question? Their job isn't to solve your problems. It's to help you think more clearly about your problems. These practices collectively turn strategic thinking from an occasional activity into a way of being. You're not just thinking strategically when you face major decisions. You're operating from a strategic mindset consistently, which means small decisions align with large goals. Opportunities get spotted early, and you're rarely blindsided because you've been scanning the horizon continuously. If you're serious about developing strategic thinking, you need to be part of a community that values it. Subscribe to this channel, join the conversation in the comments, and engage with others who are on this journey. Strategic thinking is developed in community, not in isolation. Strategic thinking and competitive advantage. Let's return to the core question. In competitive environments, how do you win? The answer is never about being better than your competition at what they're already doing. That's a race to incremental improvement. And even if you win, you're just the best at playing someone else's game. Strategic competitive advantage comes from changing the game itself, from competing on dimensions that favor your natural strengths and structural position, from making choices that create a coherent system where each piece reinforces the others. Think about this carefully. Your competition is making strategic choices too, whether consciously or not. Their choices create vulnerabilities, blind spots, and commitments. Your strategic opportunity is to identify those vulnerabilities and position yourself to exploit them. This isn't about being ruthless or unethical. It's about understanding the structure of competition and making smart choices within that structure. Let's say you're competing for jobs in a specific field. Your competitors are probably all doing similar things, getting the standard credentials, building resumes that look like everyone else's, applying through the same channels. That's not a strategic approach. That's following the default path. A strategic approach asks, what are most people in my field not doing that would be valuable? What capabilities could I build that are rare in this domain? What problems exist that nobody is solving well? How could I create a position where I'm not just another candidate, but someone who brings something genuinely different? Maybe everyone in your field has deep technical skills, but poor communication skills. If you develop both technical depth and communication excellence, you're not competing against everyone with technical skills. You're competing in a much smaller pool of people who can do both. That's positional advantage. Or maybe everyone is generalizing, trying to be competent at many things. If you specialize deeply in something specific that's becoming increasingly important, you create a position where you're the obvious choice for a specific type of problem, rather than just an acceptable choice for general work. The key insight is that competitive advantage isn't about absolute capabilities. It's about relative positioning. You don't need to be the absolute best in the world at something. You need to be distinctly better than available alternatives at something that matters to someone. This reframes how you think about developing capabilities. You're not trying to be good at everything. You're trying to create a unique combination of capabilities that makes you the obvious choice for specific opportunities. But here's where this gets really interesting. Sustainable competitive advantage requires that your position is difficult to copy. If your advantage is easy to replicate, it's not really an advantage. Someone will copy it and your advantage disappears. What makes positions difficult to copy? Usually it's one of three things. First, time. Advantages that take years to build can't be copied quickly. Deep expertise, strong relationships, accumulated reputation. These take time, and time can't be bought. If your advantage is based on something you've built over years, competitors can't just decide to match you overnight. Second, complexity. Advantages that come from multiple interacting elements are hard to copy because you can't just copy one piece. You need to copy the entire system, and all the pieces need to fit together right. Southwest's advantage wasn't just point-to-point flying, or just one type of aircraft, or just no-frill service. It was the combination of all those choices working together in a coherent system. Third, incompatibility. Sometimes your advantage is something that competitors can't copy without destroying their existing position. Traditional airlines couldn't copy Southwest's model without cannibalizing their business class revenue and premium routes. Their existing commitments made it impossible to respond effectively. When you think about your own strategic positioning, ask, what advantages am I building that will be hard to copy? Am I just doing things that anyone could replicate quickly? Or am I creating positions based on time, complexity, or incompatibility that will be sustainable? This is why strategic thinking is so important. Without it, you're just reacting to what competitors do, trying to keep up, never getting ahead. With it, you're proactively creating positions that are defensible and valuable. Strategic thinking beyond business. We've used a lot of business examples, but strategic thinking applies to every domain of life. In fact, some of the most important applications have nothing to do with business. Consider your health. Most people think about health tactically. I'll go on a diet. I'll start exercising. These are tactics. Strategic thinking about health asks different questions. What lifestyle patterns am I building that will compound over decades? What environmental and social factors shape my daily choices about food, activity, and stress? How can I design my life so that healthy choices become default rather than requiring constant willpower? Strategic health thinking recognizes that your health at 60 is largely determined by habits you build in your 30s and 40s. It's a long time horizon problem. The question isn't just, what should I do this month to lose weight? It's what systems and habits should I build now that will keep me healthy and capable for the next 40 years? The same applies to relationships. Tactical relationship thinking is, how do I resolve this current conflict? Strategic relationship thinking is, what patterns exist in my relationships? What kind of person do I become in different relationships? Which relationships bring out my best self, and which bring out less helpful patterns? Who should I invest deeply in, and who should I let drift away naturally? Strategic thinking about relationships recognizes that your social network shapes who you become. The 5 people you spend the most time with influence your values, your ambitions, your habits, your worldview. That's not tactical advice about networking. It's strategic insight about how environment shapes development over time. Or consider learning and skill development. Tactical learning is, I need to learn Python or Spanish or public speaking. Strategic learning asks, what meta skills am I developing that will make me better at learning anything? Am I building my capacity for focused work? Am I developing frameworks for organizing information? Am I getting better at recognizing patterns and making connections across domains? Strategic learners understand that the most valuable thing you can learn is how to learn better. That skill compounds across your entire life. Tactical learners collect specific skills. Strategic learners develop the capacity to acquire and integrate any skill. What about personal finance? Tactical financial thinking is about budgeting, saving, investing. Strategic financial thinking asks, what relationship do I have with money? Am I optimizing for present consumption or future freedom? Am I building assets that generate passive income or just trading time for money? What financial position would give me maximum optionality in how I spend my time and energy? Strategic financial thinking recognizes that money is a tool for creating freedom, and different financial strategies create different types of freedom. The question isn't just, how do I get more money? It's what financial position would best enable the life I actually want to live. Even in domains that seem purely personal, strategic thinking transforms how you approach decisions. Consider your daily routines and habits. Most people let routines happen accidentally. Strategic thinkers design routines deliberately. What activities energize you versus drain you? When in the day are you most creative, most analytical, most social? How can you structure your day so that you're doing the right type of work at the right time? What morning routine would set you up for a productive day? What evening routine would ensure good sleep and recovery? These might seem like small, tactical questions, but approached strategically, they shape your entire life. Your daily routines compound. How you spend your days is how you spend your life. Design those days strategically, and you're designing your life strategically. The common thread across all these domains is that strategic thinking requires stepping back from the immediate to see patterns, build systems, and make choices that compound over time. It's the opposite of just reacting to whatever comes up. Common strategic thinking traps. Even people who try to think strategically fall into predictable traps. Being aware of these traps is the first step to avoiding them. The first trap is analysis paralysis. Strategic thinking requires gathering information and considering alternatives. But some people get stuck in analysis mode forever. They keep researching, keep considering more options, never committing to a direction. This usually comes from fear of making a wrong choice. The antidote is to remember that strategic thinking isn't about finding the perfect answer. It's about making a well-reasoned choice with available information, then adjusting as you learn. Set decision deadlines. After this date, with whatever information I have, I will choose. That forces you out of perpetual analysis. The second trap is planning as strategy. We've covered this, but it's worth repeating because it's so common. People create detailed plans full of activities and call it strategy. But if your strategy is just a list of things to do with no coherent theory about why those things will lead to winning, you don't have a strategy. You have a to-do list. The test is, can you articulate your theory of competitive advantage? Can you explain how your choices fit together into a coherent system? Can you identify what would have to be true for your approach to work? If not, you're planning, not strategizing. The third trap is strategic imitation. People see what successful competitors do and copy it, thinking that's strategy. But successful strategies are contextual. What works for someone else in their situation might not work for you in your situation. Copying tactics without understanding the underlying strategic logic usually fails. The antidote is to study successful strategies, not to copy them, but to understand their logic. Why did those choices make sense in that context? What was the theory? What were the critical capabilities? Then ask, what would be the equivalent logic in my context? You're not copying. You're learning principles and applying them appropriately. The fourth trap is rigid commitment. Strategic thinking requires commitment to a direction. But some people confuse commitment with inflexibility. They choose a strategy and then refuse to adjust it even when clear evidence emerges that it's not working. This often comes from sunk cost thinking or from tying ego to being right. The antidote is to distinguish between your strategic direction and your specific tactics. Stay committed to your overall direction while remaining flexible about tactics. And build an explicit review points where you reassess whether your strategy is still working. Commitment doesn't mean stubbornness. The fifth trap is infinite optionality. Some people never commit to anything because they want to keep all options open indefinitely. This feels safe but leads nowhere. You never develop depth. You never build momentum. You remain perpetually at the surface level in everything. The antidote is to recognize that strategic optionality is about preserving options during exploration, then committing once you've identified a promising direction. It's not about never committing. It's about committing at the right time. The sixth trap is mistaking activity for progress. This is especially common in cultures that valorize being busy. People confuse working hard with working strategically. They're always active, always doing things, but they're not making progress toward meaningful goals because their activity isn't strategically directed. The antidote is to regularly ask, is what I'm doing right now actually moving me toward my strategic goals? Or am I just staying busy? Busy is easy. Strategic is hard. Don't confuse them. The seventh trap is short-term thinking masquerading as strategy. People make choices based on short-term optimization and then rationalize those choices as strategic. But strategy inherently involves longer time horizons. If your strategy is just optimizing for the next quarter or the next year, it's probably not strategic thinking. It's tactical optimization with strategic language. The antidote is to explicitly name your time horizon and make sure it's actually long-term. For personal strategy, think in decades. For business strategy, think in multiple years. If you're not thinking at least 3 to 5 years out, you are probably not thinking strategically. The eighth trap is ignoring constraints. Some strategic thinking becomes too abstract, too divorced from practical constraints. Yes, think big and think long-term, but your strategy also needs to be executable within your actual constraints of resources, capabilities, and context. The antidote is to balance aspiration with realism. Dream big, but then ask, what would it actually take to execute this? What resources would I need? What capabilities would I need to build? Is this feasible, or am I just fantasizing? Good strategy is ambitious but executable. Building your strategic thinking system. At this point, you understand what strategic thinking is, why it matters, and how it works. Now let's talk about building a personal system for strategic thinking that actually works in your life. The foundation of any strategic thinking system is reflection time. You cannot think strategically if you're constantly in execution mode. You need regular, protected time to step back and think about the bigger picture. For most people, weekly and quarterly reviews work well. Weekly reviews are for tactical adjustment, looking at what happened this week and planning next week within your larger strategic framework. Quarterly reviews are for strategic assessment, stepping back to evaluate whether your strategy is still working and whether you need to adjust it. During these reviews, use consistent questions. For weekly reviews, what happened this week that was strategically significant? What did I learn? What should I do differently next week? Am I spending time on what matters most? For quarterly reviews, am I making progress toward my long-term goals? Is my theory of how to achieve those goals still sound? What assumptions am I making that I should test? What's changed in my environment that might require strategic adjustment? What capabilities have I built? What should I focus on building next? Write down your answers. The act of writing forces clarity. Vague thoughts become concrete when you have to articulate them in writing. You'll spot inconsistencies and gaps that you'd miss if you just think about these questions without writing. The second component of a strategic thinking system is environmental design. Strategic thinking doesn't happen automatically. You need to create an environment that supports it. This means removing distractions during your reflection time. Turn off notifications. Find a quiet space. Let people know you're unavailable. Protect this time fiercely because nothing feels urgent about strategic thinking, which means it's always at risk of being displaced by things that feel urgent. It also means creating triggers that pull you into strategic mode. Some people have a specific location where they do strategic thinking. Some have a specific time of day. Some have a specific ritual that begins their strategic thinking time. The specifics don't matter. What matters is having environmental cues that help your brain shift from tactical execution mode to strategic thinking mode. The third component is maintaining your strategic counsel. Remember, strategic thinking improves with diverse perspectives. Schedule regular conversations with people who help you think more clearly. Come to these conversations prepared. Share what you're thinking about strategically. Share your assumptions. Ask for challenge and critique. The people in your strategic council aren't there to make you feel good. They're there to make you think better. After these conversations, reflect on what you heard. What perspective did they bring that you were missing? What assumptions did they challenge? What did you learn about your own thinking by having to articulate it to someone else? The fourth component is creating feedback loops. Strategic thinking improves when you can see the results of your strategic choices. Create systems for tracking outcomes. This doesn't need to be elaborate. It can be as simple as a spreadsheet or document where you track, what strategic choice did I make? What was my theory about why it would work? What actually happened? What did I learn? Over time, This creates a personal database of strategic experiments. You start to see patterns in what works and what doesn't for you specifically. You develop intuitions about which types of strategies tend to succeed in your context. This is how strategic thinking evolves from generic principles to personalized wisdom. The fifth component is continuous learning about strategy. Strategic thinking is a skill, and like any skill, it improves with study and practice. Read books on strategy. Study how great strategic thinkers approach problems. Analyze historical strategies and what made them succeed or fail. But don't just consume this information. Apply it. After reading about a strategic framework, ask, how does this apply to my situation? How could I use this? What would I need to adapt to make it work in my context? The sixth component is building strategic habits. Strategic thinking shouldn't only happen during designated reflection times. It should become a natural part of how you process information and make decisions. Build the habit of asking strategic questions reflexively. When something happens, pause briefly and ask, what pattern is this part of? What does this suggest about larger trends? How does this affect my strategic position? These micro moments of strategic thinking compound over time. Build the habit of connecting new information to your strategic framework. When you learn something new, ask, how does this relate to my goals? Does this create an opportunity? Does this suggest I should adjust my strategy? You're not just consuming information. You're actively integrating it into your strategic understanding. Build the habit of thinking in terms of systems and leverage. When you're considering an action, ask, will this create compounding returns? Will this improve my position for future opportunities? Or is this just solving an immediate problem without strategic value? These habits transform strategic thinking from something you do occasionally into something you do continuously. It becomes your natural mode of engaging with the world. Building a strategic thinking system takes time and effort, but it's perhaps the highest leverage thing you can do. If this resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community of strategic thinkers, and I want you to be part of it. Strategic thinking in different life stages. The application of strategic thinking changes as you move through different life stages. The principles remain the same, but the specific challenges and opportunities differ. In your early 20s, strategic thinking is primarily about exploration and capability building. You have time but limited experience. Your strategy should emphasize learning, experimenting, and building foundational capabilities. Keep optionality high. Try different things. Build diverse skills. Your competitive advantage at this stage is your ability to learn and adapt quickly without the constraints of major commitments. The trap to avoid: committing too early to a specific path before you've explored enough to know where you can win. But also avoid the opposite trap: exploring so broadly that you never develop depth in anything. In your late 20s and 30s, strategic thinking shifts toward focused development. You've explored enough to identify some areas where you have natural advantages or genuine interest. Now it's time to commit and build depth. Your strategy should emphasize developing distinctive capabilities, building professional reputation, and establishing strong relationships in your chosen domain. The trap to avoid: continuing to explore when you should be committing. By your 30s, if you're still trying to figure out what you want to do, you've probably over-indexed on optionality. Time to commit to a direction and build depth. In your 40s and 50s, strategic thinking is about leverage and integration. You've built capabilities and reputation. Now it's about leveraging those assets more effectively. Your strategy might emphasize taking on bigger challenges, moving into leadership positions, or finding ways to have larger impact using what you've built. The trap to avoid: coasting on past success without continuing to develop strategically. Just because you've achieved success doesn't mean your strategic thinking can stop. Markets change. Technologies change. Your advantages can become obsolete if you're not continuing to adapt and evolve. In your 60s and beyond, strategic thinking shifts again toward legacy and sustainability. You have accumulated wisdom, capabilities, and relationships. Your strategy might emphasize mentoring others, transitioning to different types of work that remain engaging as your energy and priorities change, and ensuring that what you've built has lasting impact. The trap to avoid: thinking strategically ends when your career does. Some of the most important strategic thinking happens in this phase as you consider how to transition gracefully, what legacy you want to leave, and how to remain engaged and purposeful in your later years. The specific strategies vary across life stages, but the meta skill of strategic thinking remains valuable throughout. The person who thinks strategically at 25 will have more options at 35 than someone who just worked hard without strategic direction. The person who thinks strategically at 45 will have more impact at 55 than someone who coasted on past success. Strategic thinking is a lifetime practice, not a one-time activity. The returns compound across your entire life. The integration of strategic thinking. We've covered a lot of ground. Let's integrate these ideas into a coherent framework you can actually use. Strategic thinking operates at 3 levels simultaneously. At the foundational level, it's a mindset. It's the habit of stepping back, seeing patterns, thinking in systems, considering long-term consequences. This mindset becomes your default mode of engaging with the world. You're not waiting for major decisions to think strategically. You're thinking strategically all the time. At the intermediate level, it's a set of practices, weekly and quarterly reviews, maintaining your strategic counsel, explicitly articulating your logic, testing assumptions, building feedback loops. These practices give structure to strategic thinking and ensure it actually happens rather than being something you intend to do but never get around to. At the application level, it's specific frameworks for specific domains. How to think strategically about your career. How to think strategically about relationships. How to think strategically about learning. How to think strategically about health. Each domain has its specific considerations, but they all use the same underlying strategic mindset and practices. The power comes from integration across all 3 levels. The mindset informs the practices. The practices generate insights. The insights get applied in specific domains. The results of those applications inform your mindset. It's a reinforcing cycle. And here's what makes strategic thinking so transformative. Once you develop it, it becomes the meta skill that enhances every other skill. You're not just better at your specific domain. You're better at identifying which capabilities to build, how to build them efficiently, when to shift focus, and how to create positions where your capabilities create asymmetric advantage. Your decisions become clearer because you're making them within a coherent strategic framework rather than reactively responding to circumstances. Your goals become more achievable because you're not just hoping to achieve them. You have a theory about how your actions will lead to those outcomes, and you're testing and refining that theory constantly. Your opportunities multiply because you're positioned where opportunities emerge rather than waiting for them to become obvious. Your resilience increases because you're not dependent on any single path. You've built capabilities and relationships that create optionality when circumstances change. Strategic thinking doesn't make you immune to failure or challenge, but it dramatically improves your ability to navigate uncertainty, learn from setbacks, and ultimately create the outcomes you want rather than just accepting whatever outcomes happen to you. The strategic life. Let's end where we began, with the recognition that most people are playing a game they don't even know exists. They're reactive, tactical, and ultimately shaped by circumstances rather than shaping their circumstances. Strategic thinking is the skill that changes this dynamic. It's not about being smarter or working harder. It's about thinking differently. It's about seeing patterns where others see random events. It's about creating positions where luck finds you. It's about making choices that compound over time instead of just solving immediate problems. The good news is that strategic thinking is learnable. It's not a gift you're born with or without. It's a skill you can develop through deliberate practice. Everything we've covered, the frameworks, the practices, the habits, these are all learnable. The challenging news is that strategic thinking requires changing how you operate at a fundamental level. It's not about adding one more technique to your toolkit. It's about changing how you see the world and your place in it. That's uncomfortable. It requires confronting assumptions you've held for years. It requires accepting uncertainty. It requires making choices that feel risky because you can't prove they'll work in advance. But here's what I've observed over years of studying strategic thinkers. The people who develop this capability transform their lives in ways that seem almost magical to outside observers. They seem to always be in the right place at the right time. They seem to make decisions that consistently work out. They seem to see opportunities that others miss. It's not magic. It's not luck. It's strategic thinking. They're thinking about where they want to be years from now. They're positioning themselves to benefit from trends they see emerging. They're building capabilities that will be valuable even though they're not valuable yet. They're creating relationships that will generate opportunities down the road. They're making choices that don't optimize for today, but create compounding returns over years and decades. And here's the beautiful part. Once you develop strategic thinking, you can't not see strategically. It becomes automatic. You naturally see patterns. You naturally think long-term. You naturally consider how choices fit together into coherent systems. It's not extra work. It's just how you think. So the question isn't whether strategic thinking is valuable. The question is, are you going to develop it? Are you going to put in the uncomfortable work of learning to think differently? Are you going to step back from the tactical grind long enough to think strategically about where you're actually going? Most people won't. Most people will keep operating tactically, reacting to circumstances, staying busy without being strategic. And that's fine for them. But if you've read this far, you're not most people. You're someone who recognizes that there's a better way. Someone who's willing to think differently in order to achieve different results. The strategic life isn't about avoiding challenges or guaranteeing success. It's about approaching life with intention rather than reaction. It's about playing offense rather than defense. It's about designing your life rather than just experiencing it. That design work starts now, not tomorrow, not after you have more time or more resources or more clarity. Now, today, with whatever you have. Strategic thinking doesn't require perfect circumstances. It requires beginning to think strategically about the circumstances you're actually in. Strategic thinking as identity transformation. Let me tell you what really happens when you commit to strategic thinking. It's not just that you make better decisions or achieve better outcomes. Though those things happen, what really changes is your identity. You stop being someone things happen to and become someone who makes things happen. This identity shift is subtle at first. You start noticing when you're being reactive. You catch yourself solving the same problem for the third time and ask why the problem keeps recurring. You pause before committing to something and ask whether it aligns with your larger direction. These small moments accumulate. Over time, you develop what I call strategic confidence. It's not confidence that you'll always be right. It's confidence in your ability to navigate uncertainty, to adjust when you're wrong, to position yourself advantageously even when you can't control outcomes. This confidence is earned through the practice of strategic thinking, through making strategic choices and living with their consequences, through adjusting your approach based on what you learn. People who develop strategic confidence carry themselves differently. They're not anxious about every decision because they're operating from a coherent framework. They're not paralyzed by uncertainty because they've learned to make strategic bets with incomplete information. They're not devastated by setbacks because they understand that learning from failure is part of the strategic process. This doesn't mean they're emotionless or that they don't care about outcomes. It means they've developed a different relationship with success and failure. Success isn't validation that they're right. Failure isn't evidence that they're wrong. Both are information that refines their strategic understanding. Consider what this means in practice. When you face a career decision, a non-strategic thinker agonizes over which choice is right. A strategic thinker asks, which choice better positions me for the opportunities I'm creating? Which choice builds capabilities I'll need? Which choice tests assumptions I need to test? The decision becomes less about right versus wrong and more about strategic positioning. When you face a relationship challenge, a non-strategic thinker asks, how do I fix this immediate problem? A strategic thinker asks, what pattern is this part of? What does this reveal about compatibility or communication? Is this relationship aligned with who I'm becoming? The challenge becomes information rather than just a problem to solve. When you face a financial choice, a non-strategic thinker asks, can I afford this? A strategic thinker asks, what capabilities or opportunities does this purchase create or foreclose? How does this align with my theory about financial independence? What am I optimizing for? The decision becomes part of a larger financial strategy rather than an isolated transaction. This identity as a strategic thinker changes how you show up in the world. You become someone who asks different questions, someone who sees connections others miss, someone who positions themselves advantageously, someone who designs their life rather than just living it. The compound effect of strategic choices. Here's something most people don't understand about strategic thinking. The benefits compound exponentially over time. A single strategic choice might not seem dramatically different from a tactical choice, but strategic choices compound with other strategic choices to create outcomes that seem disproportionate to the individual decisions. Let me explain what I mean. Imagine two people with similar capabilities and opportunities. Person A makes tactical choices. They optimize each decision independently for immediate benefit. They take the highest paying job. They choose the most convenient option. They solve problems as they arise. Each individual choice seems reasonable. Person B makes strategic choices. They take a lower paying job that builds rare capabilities. They choose inconvenient options that create better positioning. They solve root causes rather than symptoms. Each individual choice might seem less optimal in the short term. After 1 year, Person A and Person B might not look that different. Person A might even seem to be doing better. More money, fewer hassles, tangible progress. But watch what happens over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Person B has been building capabilities that compound. The rare skills they developed opened doors that weren't available to Person A. The relationships they invested in create opportunities Person A doesn't even hear about. The problems they solve at the root level don't keep recurring, so they have bandwidth for new challenges. The positioning they created means opportunities come to them rather than them having to chase opportunities. Meanwhile, Person A is still optimizing tactically. They're still solving the same categories of problems because they never addressed root causes. They're still competing in crowded spaces because they never differentiated. They're still trading time for money because they never built assets that generate value without their direct effort. The gap between them grows exponentially. not because person B is smarter or works harder, but because their strategic choices compounded while person A's tactical choices didn't. This is the power of strategic thinking over extended time horizons. Individual strategic choices might not seem dramatically better than tactical alternatives, but strategic choices stack. They reinforce each other. They create platforms for future choices. They compound. Think about your own life. What strategic choices could you make today that would compound over the next decade? What capabilities could you start building that will be exponentially more valuable in 10 years? What relationships could you invest in that will open unexpected doors? What problems could you solve at the root level so they stop consuming your energy? These aren't comfortable questions because they require thinking in longer time horizons than most people are used to. They require making choices that might not optimize for this quarter or this year. They require faith that the compounding will occur even though you can't see it yet. But this is exactly what strategic thinking demands. You're planting seeds that won't bear fruit for years. You're making investments that won't pay off this quarter. You're building foundations that won't be visible until you've built several stories on top of them. Most people won't do this. Most people optimize for the visible, the immediate, the certain. That's why most people don't experience the compound effect of strategic choices. But if you commit to strategic thinking, if you make choices that compound, you set in motion forces that create increasingly disproportionate outcomes over time. Strategic thinking in crisis and uncertainty. Strategic thinking reveals its true value in times of crisis and uncertainty. When everything is stable and predictable, tactical thinking works fine. But when the ground shifts, when the rules change, when the future becomes genuinely uncertain, that's when strategic thinking becomes essential. I've observed that people with developed strategic thinking capabilities respond to crisis fundamentally differently than those without it. When crisis hits, non-strategic thinkers panic. They react frantically. They make short-term decisions to relieve immediate anxiety. They cling to what used to work even when it clearly doesn't work anymore. Strategic thinkers do something different. They pause. They assess. They ask, what's actually changing? What opportunities does this disruption create? What assumptions should I update? How should I reposition given this new reality? This isn't about being unemotional or unconcerned. Strategic thinkers feel the same anxiety and uncertainty everyone else feels, but they've trained themselves to not let that anxiety drive reactive decisions. They've built the capacity to sit with uncertainty while thinking through implications and options. Consider what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some people went into survival mode, trying desperately to preserve what they had before. Others saw the disruption and asked strategic questions. What's permanently changed? What new needs have emerged? How can I position myself for the world that's emerging rather than the world that was? The people who asked strategic questions didn't necessarily avoid difficulty, but they positioned themselves to emerge from the crisis stronger. They identified trends that were accelerated by the crisis. They built capabilities that would be more valuable in the new environment. They made bold moves while others were paralyzed. This pattern repeats across all types of crises. Economic downturns, industry disruptions, personal setbacks. Strategic thinkers use these moments to reposition. They understand that crisis creates clarity. It reveals what's actually important versus what just seemed important. It shows which advantages were real and which were dependent on specific conditions. There's a concept in biology called hormesis. It's the idea that organisms become stronger through exposure to stressors. Strategic thinkers apply this concept to themselves. They don't seek out crisis, but when crisis comes, they use it to become stronger, more adaptable, better positioned. How do you develop this capacity? Start with small disruptions. When something goes wrong, practice pausing before reacting. Ask, what can I learn from this? How can I use this? What opportunity does this create? Build the muscle of strategic response in low-stakes situations so it's available in high-stakes situations. Build the habit of identifying multiple scenarios and considering how you'd respond to each. You're not predicting which scenario will happen. You're preparing yourself mentally so that when disruption comes, you're not starting from zero. You've already thought through different possibilities and have frameworks for responding. Build the capacity to act decisively with incomplete information. Strategic thinking in crisis requires making moves before you have perfect clarity. You can't wait for certainty because certainty doesn't exist in crisis. You develop a theory about what's happening, make a move based on that theory, and adjust as you learn more. Most importantly, maintain your long-term orientation even in short-term crisis. Yes, you need to address immediate threats. But even while managing the immediate, keep asking, where will I be positioned when this crisis passes? What am I building during this difficult period that will pay off later? Crisis is when strategic positioning gets established because most people abandon their long-term thinking exactly when it's most valuable. The daily practice of strategic living. Strategic thinking isn't something you do occasionally when facing big decisions. It's a way of living, and like any way of living, it's built from daily practices that accumulate over time. The first practice is the morning strategic review. Before you dive into the day's activities, take 15 minutes to think strategically. Not about what you need to do today. That's tactical. About how today fits into your larger strategic direction. What are you building with today's activities? Are your planned actions aligned with your strategic goals? Is there anything on your schedule that, viewed strategically, doesn't make sense? This morning practice prevents you from sleepwalking through your days. It ensures that your daily activities are actually serving your strategic direction rather than just keeping you busy. It creates intentionality. The second practice is strategic note-taking. Throughout your day, capture insights that seem strategically relevant. A pattern you noticed, a connection between ideas, an assumption that got challenged, a signal about a trend. Don't just consume these experiences and let them pass. Capture them. This practice builds your strategic database. Over time, you accumulate observations that help you see patterns others miss. You're not relying on memory, which is fallible. You're building an external system for strategic thinking. The third practice is the evening strategic debrief. Before ending your day, spend 10 minutes reflecting strategically. What happened today that was strategically significant? What did you learn? What should you do differently tomorrow? What assumptions got tested? What new information should influence your strategy? This evening practice ensures you're learning from your experiences. You're not just living through your days. You're extracting strategic lessons from them. This accelerates your development as a strategic thinker. The fourth practice is weekly strategic planning. We mentioned this earlier, but it's worth emphasizing. Every week, take an hour to step completely out of tactical execution and think strategically. Review your progress towards strategic goals. Assess whether your weekly activities are aligned with your strategy. Adjust your approach based on what you learned the previous week. Plan the coming week strategically, not just tactically. This weekly practice keeps your strategy alive and adaptive. Without it, strategic thinking becomes a one-time exercise that gradually becomes irrelevant as circumstances change. With it, strategy becomes a living thing that evolves and improves continuously. The fifth practice is monthly environmental scanning. Once a month, deliberately look outside your immediate domain. Read about industries you're not in. Learn about trends in different fields. Talk to people who have completely different perspectives. You're not looking for immediately applicable information. You're looking for patterns, trends, and ideas that might become relevant to your strategic thinking. This practice prevents tunnel vision. It ensures you are not just becoming better at your current game, but staying aware of how the game itself might be changing. It feeds your pattern recognition and helps you spot opportunities and threats early. The sixth practice is quarterly strategic assessment. Every 3 months, do a comprehensive review of your strategy. Are you making progress toward your long-term goals? Is your theory about how to achieve those goals still sound? What's changed in your environment that might require strategic adjustment? What have you learned in the past quarter that should inform your strategy going forward? This quarterly practice ensures strategic adaptation. Your initial strategy was your best theory with available information at the time, but you've learned a lot since then. The quarterly assessment incorporates that learning into an evolved strategy. This prevents you from rigidly sticking to an outdated strategy or from constantly changing direction without thoughtful assessment. These daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly practices create a rhythm of strategic thinking. You're not just thinking strategically once and hoping it sticks. You're building strategic thinking into the fabric of your life. It becomes automatic, natural, integrated. This level of systematic strategic thinking is what separates people who occasionally think strategically from people who live strategically. If you want to develop this systematic approach, subscribe to the channel. We'll be diving deep into specific practices, sharing templates, and building a community of people committed to strategic living, strategic relationships, and social positioning. One of the most overlooked applications of strategic thinking is to relationships and social positioning. Most people approach relationships casually, accidentally. They end up in relationships based on proximity, circumstance, or random social events. Strategic thinkers approach relationships deliberately. This doesn't mean being manipulative or transactional. It means being thoughtful about which relationships to invest in, what you bring to those relationships, and how those relationships fit into your larger life strategy. Think about your current relationships. How many of them challenge you to think differently? How many expand your perspective? How many introduce you to opportunities you wouldn't encounter otherwise? How many bring out your best self versus your mediocre self? Strategic relationship thinking asks these questions explicitly. You're not accumulating relationships randomly. You're deliberately building a network that serves specific strategic purposes, challenging your thinking, exposing you to different perspectives, connecting you to opportunities, providing support during difficulty, and helping you become the person you're trying to become. This requires being selective. You have limited time and energy. Every relationship you maintain is a choice to not invest that time and energy elsewhere. Strategic thinkers are comfortable letting relationships that don't serve mutual growth drift away naturally. They're comfortable disappointing people whose expectations don't align with their strategic direction. They're comfortable being selective about where they invest relationship energy. But here's what's interesting. Being strategic about relationships doesn't mean having fewer meaningful relationships. It often means having more, because you're investing in relationships that actually matter rather than maintaining surface-level connections out of obligation or habit. Strategic relationship thinking also applies to how you show up in relationships. What value do you bring? Are you the person who always needs help, or the person who creates value for others? Are you a connector who introduces people who should know each other? Are you someone who challenges others to think bigger? Are you someone who provides honest feedback when others need it? Your reputation and social position are strategic assets. They compound over time. Every interaction either builds or depletes your relational capital. Strategic thinkers are intentional about this. They consistently show up in ways that build their reputation as someone valuable to know. There's also strategic thinking about relationship timing and life stages. The relationships that were strategically valuable in your 20s might not be strategically valuable in your 40s. As you evolve, your strategic relationship needs change. Being thoughtful about this prevents you from maintaining relationships out of obligation long after they've stopped serving mutual growth. One specific application: strategic mentorship. Most people wait for mentors to appear magically in their lives. Strategic thinkers deliberately seek out mentors whose experience and perspective will help them navigate their strategic path. They offer value to potential mentors so that the relationship is mutually beneficial. They maintain these relationships over years and decades, creating a personal board of advisors who help them think through strategic questions. Similarly, strategic thinkers think about mentoring others. Teaching others is one of the most effective ways to clarify your own thinking. Having ments who ask you hard questions forces you to articulate your strategic logic more clearly, and the relationships you build through mentoring often become valuable in unexpected ways years later. Social positioning is another strategic consideration. Where are you positioned in your social and professional networks? Are you at the periphery, consuming information but not contributing? Are you at the center, connecting people and ideas? Are you a bridge between different networks that wouldn't otherwise connect? Strategic thinkers position themselves as connectors. They build relationships across different domains and then create value by connecting people who should know each other. This positioning makes them increasingly valuable over time because they have access to diverse perspectives and opportunities that others don't. All of this might sound calculated, but it doesn't feel that way when you're doing it. It feels like being intentional about one of life's most important domains. Your relationships shape who you become, what opportunities you encounter, and how you navigate challenges. Being strategic about relationships is being strategic about your life. The meta-strategic question: strategy about strategy. Let's go one level deeper. We've talked about thinking strategically about various domains: career, relationships, learning, health. But there's a meta-level question. How do you think strategically about developing your strategic thinking itself? This is where things get really interesting. Your ability to think strategically is itself a capability that can be developed strategically. How should you invest your time and energy to become a better strategic thinker? What experiences would most accelerate your strategic development? What knowledge gaps should you fill? What mental models should you acquire? Most people who want to become better strategic thinkers approach it haphazardly. They read a book on strategy. They attend a workshop. They try to apply some frameworks. That's tactical learning. Strategic learning about strategic thinking is different. Strategic development of strategic thinking starts with diagnosis. Where are you now in your strategic thinking capability? What aspects of strategic thinking do you already do well? Where are your gaps? Are you good at long-term thinking, but bad at considering multiple scenarios? Are you good at analysis, but struggle with synthesis? Are you good at strategy formulation, but weak at strategy execution? Once you've diagnosed your current state, you can strategically target your development. If your weakness is long-term thinking, you need experiences and practices that force you to extend your time horizon. If your weakness is considering diverse perspectives, you need to deliberately expose yourself to viewpoints that challenge your priors. If your weakness is execution, you need to focus on building systems and habits that translate strategic intention into daily action. Strategic development also means learning from the right sources. Who are the exemplars of strategic thinking? What can you learn from studying their decision-making processes? What books, courses, or experiences would give you strategic frameworks you're currently missing? This is different from random learning. You're deliberately seeking knowledge and experience that fills specific gaps in your strategic thinking capability. There's also strategic experimentation. Try different strategic frameworks and approaches. Test them in low-stakes situations. Learn what works for you and what doesn't. Strategic thinking isn't one-size-fits-all. Different people's brains work differently. What works brilliantly for someone else might not work for you. Strategic development means finding approaches that fit your specific cognitive style and context. Consider also the concept of strategic optionality in your own development. You don't need to become equally skilled at all aspects of strategic thinking. Some people are naturally better at long-term visioning. Others are naturally better at tactical execution. Others excel at scenario planning. Develop broad competence in all areas, but build distinctive strength in areas that leverage your natural advantages. This meta-strategic approach to developing strategic thinking accelerates your progress dramatically. You're not just hoping to get better at strategic thinking through experience. You're deliberately and systematically developing the capability using the same strategic principles you're learning to apply to other domains. The paradox of control. Strategic thinking is about creating outcomes, but you can't directly control outcomes. You can only control your choices and actions. Outcomes emerge from the interaction between your choices and countless other factors. Non-strategic thinkers try to control outcomes directly, leading to frustration. Or they give up entirely, assuming that since they can't control outcomes, there's no point trying. Strategic thinkers understand something more nuanced. You can't control outcomes, but you can dramatically influence probabilities. You position yourself where favorable outcomes become more likely. You build optionality so that many different outcomes lead to acceptable results. Take career transitions, a non-strategic approach. Apply for jobs until one accepts you. You're trying to control the outcome, but companies control hiring decisions. Result: repeated frustration. A strategic approach asks, how can I position myself so people in that field want to hire me? Build rare skills. Create work samples. Build relationships. Take lateral moves that give you credentials. You're not controlling whether you get hired, but you're dramatically increasing the probability. You're creating multiple paths to your goal. This understanding changes how you experience setbacks. Non-strategic thinkers think, I failed. Strategic thinkers think, that path didn't work. What did I learn? How should I adjust my positioning? Understanding this paradox makes strategic thinking sustainable. You're focused on what you can control, your choices, your positioning, your capabilities, and accepting that outcomes emerge from complex interactions you can influence, but not dictate. Legacy, the ultimate time horizon. Legacy thinking asks, what do you want to leave behind? How do you want to have mattered? What difference do you want your existence to have made? These are the most strategic questions because they fundamentally shape what's worth doing. When you think about your life from the end backwards, things that seem important in the day-to-day reveal themselves as trivial. Things that seem optional reveal themselves as essential. Legacy thinking is the ultimate strategic framework because it encompasses the longest time horizon possible. Your career strategy, relationship strategy, learning strategy, all should ultimately serve your legacy strategy. Consider life through a legacy lens. That high-paying job, does it move you toward the legacy you want to create? That comfortable relationship, does it help you become the person you want to be remembered as being? That way you're spending time. Will you be glad when you look back from the end? Here's a practice. Write your own eulogy. Not polite platitudes, but honest assessment. What do you want to have accomplished? What do you want to have been known for? Then work backwards. What would you need to do in the next year, 5 years, 10 years to make that eulogy true? Legacy thinking provides the ultimate framework for all your strategic thinking. Your strategic framework. Your personal strategic framework has 3 levels. Foundation level. your core strategic principles, unchanging beliefs and values that guide all your thinking. Examples: I optimize for learning over comfort. I play long-term games with long-term people. I build capabilities that compound. These become your filter for every decision. Middle level, your strategic positions, the specific playing fields you've chosen, and your theory for how you'll win. Career positioning, relationship strategy, financial strategy, learning strategy. These should be explicit and written down. What are you trying to achieve? How? What would have to be true for your approach to work? Application level, your tactical actions and daily practices. What you do every day that implements your strategy. Morning reviews, weekly planning, relationship investments, skill development. These tactics connect to your positions, which connect to your principles. The power is coherence. Your daily actions serve your strategic positions. Your strategic positions express your core principles. Everything fits together. This framework evolves through feedback loops. You act based on strategy. You observe results. You extract lessons. You adjust strategy. You act again. This cycle repeats, and your framework becomes increasingly sophisticated. When everything fits together, you experience effortless effectiveness. The different areas of your life reinforce each other. Progress in one area creates progress in others. This is the compound effect of strategic thinking. The call to action. Are you going to commit to strategic thinking? Not just understand it intellectually, but actually commit to developing this capability? Strategic thinking is uncomfortable. It forces you to confront uncertainty. It demands longer time horizons. It challenges you to design your life deliberately rather than reacting to circumstances. Most people will opt out. They'll stay busy with tactical concerns, stay comfortable with short-term thinking, keep operating reactively, and they'll wonder why they're not making progress. But you're not most people. You've engaged with this material. You understand the power of long-term positioning. You recognize that choices compound over time. Start today. Take 15 minutes tomorrow morning to think strategically about your day before diving into tactics. Write down, what am I trying to achieve? What's my theory for how to achieve it? What would have to be true for that theory to work? Do weekly strategic reviews. What happened this week that was strategically significant? What did you learn? Expand your perspective. Identify someone whose worldview differs from yours. Read their work. Understand their perspective. Build your strategic council. Identify 3 people who could help you think more strategically. Do these things consistently for 3 months, and you'll notice a shift. Do them for a year, and the shift becomes profound. Do them for a decade, and you'll transform your life in ways that seem magical. But it's not magic. It's strategic thinking. It's the compound effect of making strategic choices consistently over time. The game is already being played. The question is whether you'll play it consciously or unconsciously, whether you'll be strategic or reactive, whether you'll design your life or just live it. Subscribe to this channel for more frameworks, case studies, and practical applications. Strategic thinking develops in community, not in isolation. Subscribe now, and let's build that community together. Your life is your most important project. Strategic thinking is how you design it. Everything else is just tactics. Choose strategy. Choose design. Choose to live strategically. The game is already being played. Now it's your move.